Welcome back to the show, Nicole.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's been a few years since, it's not been a few years since we talked because I was on your show earlier.
Yeah,
So can you just remind me of something? I think your sober date is July something,
July
2015.
13th. July 13th.
That's my Gambler Anonymous date.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
so cool.
Yep.
I feel like we're extra connected now.
Yeah. I just had my GA meeting this morning and celebrated 5 weeks.
I'm
So
really proud of you, man. For real. I know
thanks.
that's a big accomplishment and hard to stop doing because it's like I was telling you on our episode, it's so readily available. You can just pick up your phone and access all these games and stuff that you can gamble with. So I'm really proud of you for doing that.
Yep, and I'm really proud. 9 years, that's a long time because that means you got 9 years and 5 weeks if I have 5 weeks. And can you just remind me what was going on July 12th of 2015?
So, okay. July 2nd of 2015, I got a knock on my door and it was Child Protective Services. And they took my son away because my best friend had called CPS on me. And I say best friend loosely, you guys, because it was my using friend. Me and her shot meth together. We smoked crack together. I lived with her for about 2 years in my active addiction. And then I moved out and met my husband, my now husband, but at the time he was just my boyfriend, and we got pregnant with our son in 2013, had him July 4th of 2014. And I was struggling with addiction throughout my pregnancy. And then a year from when he was born, 2 days before his first birthday, CPS took him away because my friend called CPS on me. And that's what kind of put me into getting sober. But the reason why I celebrate my sobriety date as July 13th, you would think, oh, you went to treatment, what, July 3rd? Yeah, I did. But I was relapsing inside of the rehab. I went through detox. I got completely off of all drugs and went into a residential treatment program where I then was getting Xanax brought into me off the streets. And I was using Xanax throughout the first about 10 or 11 days I was. So when they busted me, that's when I officially count my sober date because I got caught taking the Xanax and they took them away from me. So I had to go cold turkey all over again. So
Yeah, and
that's
getting
why I
off Xanax
celebrate that.
is never fun.
Huh?
Getting off Xanax is never fun.
No, especially like I had just going through like a benzo withdrawal in the detox, and they really only gave me Librium, and they gave me suboxone like for 2 days, and then they gave me nothing after that. And I was in detox for 6 days. And so when I got out, I was still really not feeling good. I was still really sick. I was still withdrawing off of benzos and opioids. And so my fiance at the time was picking me up to go because I had to go to court dates because my son had got taken away from me. We were both addicts. So when he would pick me up, he would bring me Xanax. And I was kind of, sliding up under the radar because they were giving me grace because I had just came out of detox. So they thought, oh, she's just testing positive for benzos because she just got out of detox. Well, the longer I kept testing positive and my levels weren't going down, that's when the treatment center got hip to what I was doing. And they actually caught me and my husband. He was delivering them and like hiding them under a rock. And then I would go out the next day and get them. And so it was a big ordeal. I almost got kicked out of the treatment program and almost lost custody of my son. But I was completely abstinent for those next 2 weeks in that treatment center. And when I got out of treatment, my husband was on suboxone and he was doing so good. He was having a lot of success and he was not struggling, and I was struggling. And that's when my caseworker from CPS said, hey, I know that you don't want to do a MAT program, but you can't mess up again. You already got busted in the rehab sneaking drugs in, and we already had to come down there. If this happens again, you'll have to sign rights over to your son to like your mom or your mother-in-law, or we'll take steps to terminate your rights. Basically, they were like threatening me and scaring me, And I really thought that that's what would happen. So when she offered and told me about MAT, I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And my husband was doing really, really well. And I kind of got jealous. Like, how come he's having such an easy time at this and I'm struggling so much, And so a week went by after getting out of treatment, and he was, like I said, just flying through life, going to work, just not having the struggles I was having. And that's when I decided to try and get on MAT. And I got on MAT with complete sobriety. I had nothing in my system. And that's how I started my journey on suboxone. And I have been on suboxone for the last 9 years. And so I do share that I'm on suboxone in my recovery story to everybody. I know some people don't feel comfortable telling the people that they're on MAT, but I tell it,
Yeah, well,
so
important.
That's why my sobriety date is July 13th and not July 2nd or 3rd. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it's hard to get off benzos. I know that firsthand. We've talked about that. And, if you're in a local residential treatment center, it's easy to be, for somebody sneaking into you.
When I tell you, JD, I was so sick. Like, I really want people to hear me when I say this. I was taking 7 to 10 bars a day of Xanax. I was so sick from benzo withdrawal for 8 months after I got out of treatment, after I got on suboxone. I want to share with you guys what happened to my body. I didn't know what was happening. I thought I was going crazy. I would just be chilling. My skin would start lighting up on fire. Like, it would feel like I had flames coming out of my skin. Then I would have these very, imagine a needle pricking you over and over again. I would get these needle prick feelings all over my arms and my legs. I had horrible digestive tract issues, diarrhea, for months, for about 8 months. Burning of the skin, diarrhea, heart palpitations. I had just gotten a job at Hallmark, and I would be at my job stocking the cards at Hallmark. And all of a sudden, my heart would start racing like I had just done a line of crack or meth or cocaine or meth. And my heart would start racing and just to where I would feel like I was going to pass out. And these things would happen and then go away. And so I would think, oh, maybe I'm getting better. And then it would come back. And this was over and over and over again for months and months and months, until 8 months after I got off of benzos, everything finally stopped.
Yeah, benzos are so dangerous.
And they didn't have the ability, they didn't have the proper resources to help me coming off benzos in these detox centers back then. And they still don't have the proper resources. 6 or 7 days in detox is not going to get you off of benzodiazepines safely, and so it was just torture. It was torture. And when I reflect back on how everything happened, now I realize why I was having such a hard time. But it was hard for me to accept it because I had been taught for so long, that the only way for me to get sober was through abstaining from all drugs and alcohol. So not being able to do that and getting on a medication, I felt a lot of shame.
Yeah, and there's no, Suboxone for benzos. Opiates, you can just get prescribed Suboxone, and that's going to help curb the appetite. That's going to help with the withdrawals. But there's no Suboxone or anything. So there's Vivitrol for opiates. There's naltrexone. There's a bunch of options to get off of opiates, but benzos are even more dangerous. And yet there's no alternative for you to take that's going to help with the withdrawals that can last, like you said, up to 8 months.
Yeah. It was terrible.
How long did you stay in addiction?
So I started using substances at about 16 and a half, 17 years old. My first introduction to drugs was a stimulant medication called phentermine. I had actually went to my mom and was crying, telling her that I was fat and ugly, which I was not fat, but I thought I was. And she took me to our primary care physician, and he prescribed me phentermine. And I started taking that. He only gave me a month, 2 months supply. So the first ever took phentermine, I knew right then, like, this is where it's at. I took it. It, first of all, it curbed my appetite, gave me energy, helped me focus. And I felt like in my little 16-year-old brain that it made me better. And so I started to overtake it. And because I only could get it for 2 months, I lost like 25 pounds really quickly. I was so excited. I was getting so much positive reinforcement for losing all this weight. And people were telling me how great I looked, and I felt great. And then I couldn't get the medication anymore because my doctor was like, this isn't a long-term med. So that's when I was about 17. I started going and getting drugs off the street. I started getting meth and cocaine from my friends that I was already like dabbling with. I was smoking pot and drinking a little alcohol. But I started going out into like really getting serious drugs at about 17 years old, and was full blown addicted to stimulants, methamphetamine, specifically by the time I was 18 years old. And actually, opioids didn't even come into my life until I used them when I was 17 because of a wisdom teeth extraction. But I would say that my addiction to them really didn't start until I was about in my mid 20s. It
Where are
was
you
more.
from? Did you have an
I live in
accent?
I live in Little Rock, but I was born in New York, live in Hot Spring, but grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. My mom and dad are from. My dad's from New York. My mom is from California, and they relocated to Hot Springs, Arkansas when I was like 5, and
Uh-huh.
I've lived there all my life. I'm country as hell.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big difference, California and New York, all the way down to, a little small town in Arkansas.
Yeah, they met in the Air Force, and they were stationed to Jacksonville Air Force Base. So that's why they came back to Arkansas. Because when my mom got pregnant, my dad was like, they were talking like, where do we want to raise our family? My dad was like, let's do it in Arkansas. So they lived in my grandma's basement, like I said, till I was about 4 or 5. And then they moved us down to Arkansas.
Are you an only child?
No, I have 2 little sisters. I'm the oldest, and I have 2 sisters. My sister Michelle is my middle sister, and then my baby sister is Christine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and you're close with them?
Oh yeah, yeah. We're like back to back. I am 42. My sister Michelle is about to be 41 in November, and my sister Christine is about to be 40 in May. So we were all real close.
Yeah, okay. My brother and I are 3 years apart, and my sister and I are 9 years apart.
Mm.
But I'm the oldest out of all 3, and I'm the one that made all the bad decisions that they learned from.
I made the bad decisions, and so did my sister Michelle. So my sister Michelle struggled with bipolar disorder, and back when we were growing up, like it wasn't really talked about. Mental health wasn't, and so my parents didn't know how to help her, and so she started to use substances. My sister actually started using drugs before I did, and then I saw her using drugs, was watching what she was doing, but didn't realize that it was like, I guess I just didn't realize that it would happen to me. I thought that I could use drugs and like get away unscathed without having negative consequences. I was delusional, but I was also just a kid. And I guess because I was still young, a lot of the consequences that I did experience, I bounced back from. Like I got a public intox when I was 17 because I was drunk at a basketball game I was supposed to be cheering at. And like I said, I went, I got arrested, I got out of jail, I paid my fine, and then I went on about my day. Like it didn't affect me.
There was no real consequence to it.
Yeah. And then later on in life, I even went to prison because of possessing methamphetamine. But I didn't go right away. Like my first consequence for possessing meth was slap on the wrist probation. And then I couldn't keep up with probation. I kept using drugs, and so they violated me and sent me to prison. But even in prison, like my prison experience, I think I did 90 days in county jail and like 6.5, 7 months in prison. So it was like, I know it sounds like funny, but it's like less than a year of my life, and then I was back out again. And so it's like these experiences that I was having that were consequences to my actions, they weren't severe enough to really have an impact on my life.
Were you
At that
using
time,
in prison?
did I use in prison?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Not the whole time. When I got to prison, I went to prison in 2009. I got out in 2010. Um, I got there and I was straight laced. My focus was, staying sober and getting out of prison and getting into a sober living to help me stay sober. And so that's what I had planned on doing. 2 months before I got out of prison, y'all, was walking into the bathroom, and one of my roommates, I guess not roommates, but like we were in a like a
The
it's like
cell
a
block.
unit. Yeah, they call it a unit. It's like a building, and there's all beds lined up in the unit that are racks. She was on the rack beside me, and her name was Rhonda. I'll never forget it. I walked in, and Rhonda had dropped a cellophane baggie that she was pulling out of her that had pills in it. And so I saw it. She saw me seeing her, and she was like, "Hey, I'll give you a couple of these every Saturday if you just don't tell on me," because her granny and her mom were smuggling these pills into her every weekend visit. And so, don't, I mean, they were gangster with it because, I mean, I don't know how they were doing it, but they were doing it. And she had pills the whole time that we were locked up. I just didn't know about it until the last 2 months I was there. And so,
What
of
kind of
course, I
pills were
took
they?
them. I want to say that the Lortabs, they were the white pills with the blue dots on them. Aren't those the Lortabs?
Oh, okay.
You
I
know,
believe so. Yeah, yeah.
Lortabs, and then she also was getting like Norco 10s. So it wasn't like oxys or anything, but I hadn't used in months. So she gave me like two or three, and I would take them all at one time, and I would feel good for like a couple hours. That was it. But it was miserable because what got in my head was they're going to random drug test me, and they're going to find out that I've been, and I'm going to have to stay in here longer. And so I did it for like a month and a half, and then I was like, I can't do this anymore because my conscience got the best of me, and my TE date, which was my date to be released, was getting closer and closer, and I did not want to jeopardize not being released. It's like, hey, you can keep them the next. It was like she gave them to me like 4 times, and then the next time I was like, I'm out. It's too close to my date of time to get out. I'm done. And so I stopped doing it. It was just like one day a week on Saturdays when visitation would come.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So you get out and you go right back to meth?
Okay, so when I got out of prison in 2010, I paroled out to a sober living facility in Little Rock, Arkansas, which was not where I was from. And I didn't plan on doing that. I wanted to parole out to my mom and dad's house, but when I called my probation officer, she informed me that I was banned from Garland County. I wasn't allowed to come back. And so I had to relocate. So I relocated to Pulaski County here in Little Rock and to a sober living. And I moved into the sober living, and I stayed sober for 9 months. I got a sponsor. I started going to meetings. I did everything they told me, everything they tell you to do, therapy, meetings, sponsor. I was secretary of my home group. Like, I was really involved. I got a full-time job working at Kroger as a deli manager. I was doing really, really well. I earned my car back. My parents brought me my car back and I was able to drive, and I was paying my insurance, paying my rent at the sober living. And I had about 6 months sober, and it was ready for me to graduate to the next level of the sober living, which was moving out of the sober living and into the apartments that were next door. And they were owned by the sober living, but you would have your own apartment. And of course, they could come in and check your house, your refrigerator, anytime they wanted to, just for extra support. And so I moved into my own apartment. I was doing really well. Then one of my girlfriends from the sober living graduated over to the apartments, and she moved into the apartment beside me. It was a Sunday night. Every Sunday we would have pasta night, right? Where we would drink grape juice and act like it was wine and have really good pasta and watch movies together. It was a Sunday night that we were supposed to have our pasta and wine night, grape juice. And she called me over to come over because she needed help with something. And when I got there, she was injecting a Roxy. She needed help hitting herself. And I had no idea that she was injecting Roxy's. I had no idea that she had relapsed. And I had taken opioids orally And I was, I had been addicted to opioids orally and nasally for years at that point, but I had never injected them. And curiosity got the cat, and I was like, "Can I have one? Do you have another one?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I busted it down and shot up a Roxy 30 for my first time after being sober for almost a year, 9 months, and in her apartment right there in the sober living. And I was off to the races. I was back to, she introduced me to her plug who lived across the street from the sober living in the high rise apartments that were not the sober living apartments. And so I started going over to his house all the time, just hanging out with him as an apartment before I would go to work, buying Zans and blues from him every day before work, every day after work. I had plenty of money coming in because I was back on my feet. I was a manager of the deli, and I was able to like skate under the radar of the sober living for a while until my counselor was like, "You haven't been to see me in a month, and I know that you're relapsed. You need to come in." And
And
I
blues are
had
dangerous. Blues are like a whole other kind of drug than oxys. And
well, these were not fentanyl. These were real roxycodone blue
oh no,
30s.
oh yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I was addicted to for 10 years, are the blue 30s.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's all I wanted. I
Yeah.
didn't even know you could shoot them until I went to rehab. I learned that. I learned people were shooting them. I was like, shooting them? Don't you just snort them?
Yeah.
Because me, I was addicted to snorting just as much as I was addicted to the drug. If that makes sense. I
Oh, yeah,
romanticized
totally.
snorting. I remember one time I lived 2 hours from my plug, and I would make that drive 4 to 5 times a week to go pick up blues. And there would be a few times where I had money because I was making good money back then because I was able to afford blues and not dope. I could have afforded heroin, but I chose to pay more to have blues. My theory was always, I know exactly what I'm getting out of these 30s, and I don't know what I'm getting in that bag. So I would always get blues. And there was a couple times where I had enough money, but I was so sick I couldn't do the drive. And I would pay this kid $100 if he would get them for me and bring them
Mhm.
out to me. And he was delivering me 20. It was him and his buddy made the drive. And he got there, and I was in my head, I'm doing the math early. I'm like, I'm only going to do 2. I'm going to feel better. I got to do enough just to feel right. And then, I'm going to be good to go. And then he gets there and he says to me, I was telling my buddy how you could snort 4 in one line. You should show him. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. Like right away, I threw away my
Yeah.
plan of just doing 2 just because my ego was like, let me show off how I can snort 4 in one line. And, it just, I lost so many that night because I just got super high. I just kept doing them. And I ended up with like 3 left over 2 days later, and I was making that drive again.
Yeah.
Um,
The reason why so there's a very specific reason why I was only on those 30s. It's because here in Arkansas, heroin wasn't a thing. You couldn't go to a dealer on the street and go, "I need a bag of H." They would be like, "A bag of what?" Like it was. I don't think heroin really started getting into Arkansas heavy until a couple of years after I started shooting Roxy's, which was probably about 2012. And even then, when it started to infiltrate, I was afraid. I had this preconceived notion of heroin that Basketball Diaries, like fucking Requiem, like all those kind of movies that show like hardcore heroin addicts all fucked up. I was like, oh God, I'll do heroin and I'll die.
you just named 2 of my favorite movies.
I was so scared to do
Yeah,
it. I would do it.
Basketball Diaries is such a good, and that's based on a true story.
Yeah. So that's
Requiem
what
for a Dream is a
hurt me.
movie. Yeah.
That's why I didn't do heroin. And so I was banging Roxy's for years, all the way up till 2015 when I got sober. But I did eventually try heroin, like I said, in 2012. And I liked it. Great. But to me, I just liked Roxy's better for some reason. I just preferred being able to go and buy a prescription off somebody opposed to, I don't know what it was about it. Cause like I said, I could go to the dealer and he had either or. And I just liked getting Roxy 30s. I liked Roxy 30s and Dilaudid's. I just liked shooting up pills. It was like a new addiction for me. And my methamphetamine addiction that had really ruled my life, most of my addiction, at that time when I got out of prison and moved to Little Rock, kind of waned and fell to the wayside. And my addiction to opioids and benzos became my new, it became my new focus. And
Yeah,
that's what I really
you went
struggled
from
with.
uppers to downers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, did you end up finding meth while you were in Little Rock and you were shooting up the 30s?
I would shoot them up together. I would mix them. Take two Roxys, get it down, put it in with my little meth shot, and do it together. And it was an experience of a lifetime. I can tell you that right now. And I would do that all the time. That was such a euphoric, intense feeling for me. And it would make me go crazy. And this was something that really became a problem for me. This is why my addiction, when I moved here to Little Rock, really got out of hand, because of my inability to just do one drug and not be all. I don't know why I would do this. It was like it's a sickness, like, but I wanted to do everything and I couldn't hold back. If I had a bag of meth, a lot of people like yourself would save half of it for the next day, or make it last for. I had a really hard time with that, and I would find myself in horrible situations where I would overshoot myself, and I would go into psychosis, and that's what would start happening to me. I would overdose myself with opioids a lot because I mixed opioids and benzos. I actually overdosed so many times and had ended up in the hospital so many times that the state of Arkansas garnished my state taxes all the way up to last year or the year before that. And I just now, this last year, started being able to get my state taxes refund back, because that's how many times and how much I owed these hospitals, that they were taking my state income tax.
Oh, wow.
Because I would shoot oxys after a day of work. I'd be at my job at Kroger because I was still managing the deli, high as hell. I would spend a day at work tweaking balls, high on meth. I would take a couple Xanax when I would go into my shift to calm me down because I had been up all night without no sleep. And then when I would get off work, I would swing by the plug's house and grab some 30s. I would bang the 30s every time it happened, not thinking about the 4 bars I had taken 3 hours prior. And they would find me, the police, or random soul on the streets of Little Rock would find me in my car, over the steering wheel, pushing the horn, unresponsive. And I would wake up in the hospital not knowing how I got there. Like when I tell you, JD, this has happened to me over 10 times, where I would wake up not knowing how I got there. Or people would find me because I would be in the plug's house with all of my druggie friends, and we would all be injecting. I would overdose myself and they would get scared, and they would take me and drop me off at the emergency room doors. Because back then, you guys, this was before there was nasal Narcan. So people weren't just carrying around syringes of Narcan to you with, And so I would overdose and they would get afraid and they would. Thankfully, a lot of them just dumped me on the ER steps. But I've been dumped. I've been dumped by crack
somebody that kept a bunch of Narcan on her. And the one time she relapsed in a shady motel, and she happened to have 3 Narcans, and he needed to use all 3 just to get her going again. So I know how helpful. I'm glad people are practicing harm reduction and carrying Narcan on them, because it's a lifesaver. And like you said, that shit didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Or if it did exist, it wasn't so readily available as it is today. Nowadays, I'm from South Jersey, right outside of Philly, and Philly has Kensington, which is the biggest open air drug market in the country. And the girl I had on almost lost both of her arms due to shooting up for, years. And
Yeah.
her arms were all scabby and she would always pick at it. And she literally almost lost her arms because of it. And we talked about Requiem for a Dream. He literally lost his arm from shooting up so much in the same spot. I was afraid because of all those movies. I was afraid to shoot up. And it's not like I'm afraid of needles. I got 50 some tattoos. It's not like I'm afraid of needles. I was afraid to be addicted to it. And I knew if I ever put heroin in my body, then there would be no going back. And, I was a drug addict since I was 22. And I knew from the very start, within 3 months, what happened was I started taking them in October of 2008, Roxy's. And in December, right at the end of December, I was with my buddy. He had gotten his wisdom teeth out and he was on perk 5s. And I was hanging out with him and I had just snorted 330s before I went over there. And I was high, but he was nodding out and way more high just on a perk 5. And I thought to myself, wow, I really got a problem. And it didn't change me into being like, I got a problem, I got to fix this problem right now. It was, I got a problem and I need more. And it is what it is, as long as I don't do heroin. And I made rules for myself because I knew I was a drug addict and came to terms with, this is what I'm going to do because I love this so much.
Yeah.
And it's so fucked up that, it's all I wanted to do was just get high. And I worked almost the entire time I was in addiction. I kept jobs. I was a functioning addict. So on the outside looking in, I just looked like I didn't know what I was doing with my life because I kept leaving and job hopping because I kept getting fired for nodding out during. You can't nod out during work.
I would work as well, but I don't. I guess I don't say that I was functioning, even though like I held the same job for 5 years in active addiction. The job as the manager of the Kroger deli. I don't say I was functioning because I was so fucked up. Like, I just feel like by the grace of God and the people that worked there, they looked out for me. Like, they loved me. They knew I was a good worker. They knew my heart. They knew I wanted to be better. I was very open about my struggles with addiction with anybody that would listen, you know? And so they would look out for me and they would help me out. Like if I was running late because I was sick, dope sick, and I needed to stop at the plug's house to get some pills, they would cover for me. And I had a bunch of people, I guess you could say, around me who were enabling me to get fired from my job, you know? And so then when at one point working at Kroger, I was the assistant manager, and my manager of the deli, he was injecting Roxy's as well. And so we would meet before work and inject Roxy's together, and we would cover for each other. Like if he needed to go home and get some, he would leave some by his door, you know, on the doorstep for me when I got on my break, when he would come back and switch places. And so it was like I had all these different things that kind of kept me to be able to keep doing what I was doing, you know? But it wasn't like my family members. My mom and dad, when they found out I struggled with substances, they were like, "We love you, but this is it. You're on your own. We're not going to help you if you want to get help."
I remember when I worked at Best Buy, because I worked at Best Buy for like 10 years, and I was the manager there, and I was stealing hundreds out of the drawer. You know how cash registers have that slot for big bills in between, and they go underneath the main register part. I would put double-sided tape inside of there, and I would fish hundreds out of there. Yeah, and I would make sure they weren't drawers that I would use. This way, it wouldn't tie back to my drawer being short.
Yeah.
And I would take hundreds out of there, and I would text my dealer. I would hide the money inside like one of the TV boxes, and he would come through and he would pick up the money and leave them there. And then I would look like I'm just down stocking, and I would grab the pills and I would go into the bathroom and I would snort them. And it happened all the time, you know what I mean, until I got caught and got fired for it, because you can't do that and keep your job, you know.
I did the thing. I stole from my job as well, so plenty of jobs before. I didn't steal from Kroger though, and that's why I kept it for so long. I learned from jobs before that, like I didn't want that. If I wanted to actually keep the job, I didn't need to do that. But at the beginning, when I first started out, when I was still living in Hot Springs and I was doing meth, I was running a shoe carnival. I've always been in management. Have you always been in management? I've always gotten management jobs. Like, I'm a smooth
Yeah.
talker. I'm great with customers, and so I've always been in upper management. So I was working in a management position at Shoe Carnival, and me and my floor supervisor, we were running a whole shoe carnival behind the shoe carnival, setting up a table out there with shoes, selling them wholesale for cash. Like, what? Who does that? Me. We made so much money. So again, that enabled me to continue using drugs longer because I had a lot of money to buy the drugs with. It just so many different schemes and scams that I've ran and that other people helped me to run to keep me to where I was okay. And I was not, but eventually it all caught up to me and I ended up, with nothing. I ended up basically homeless, lost my car. The car got impounded. I had nowhere to live. I was sleeping on my friend's couch, paying her $400 a month just to take me to my job. And so I could sleep on her couch because I had nowhere to go. If I didn't sleep at her house, this was one of my lowest times. And it's right before I met my husband. And finally, we got together, and then I got even higher with him, and then we got sober. But one of my lowest times was working at Kroger as the deli manager. My car had gotten impounded. I had gotten kicked out of the place that I was living at. I had nowhere to sleep that night and nowhere to go, no car. And I remember I asked one of my customers, a regular, he came in every day to get sliced turkey, boar's head Cajun turkey, my favorite. And he would also get the boar's head roast beef, which is chef's kiss. I felt comfortable enough to ask him, hey man, I have nowhere to go tonight. Can I please come sleep on your couch? Because he lived within walking distance of this neighborhood Kroger I worked at. And he was like, sure. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he said, okay, Well, I realized why he said okay once I got there. It's because he liked me, and he, of course, tried to audition me and all that kind of stuff. And it was really awkward. But because I had nowhere to go, I felt almost obligated to entertain what he wanted because I had nowhere to go. I would have been sleeping on, and so that was one of my most horrible experiences because I had never had to sleep outside unhoused, and that was my wake up call that I'm going to be unhoused. And you would think that even then that would push me to get sober, but it didn't. I just would find another way. And so, like I said, I found somebody. I went to work the next day, and it was so crazy how I guess it was God putting people in my life when I was in active addiction. This guy walked in that I had went to Cocaine Anonymous with, and he was walking around shopping, and he had seen me, and he came over to talk to me, and he was complaining because he said him and his girlfriend were struggling. They were paying all this rent at this house, and they had no roommates. They were looking for a roommate. Go figure. And you know me, I was like, you got a roommate in me. So I moved in, and then I didn't have to worry. And they brought me to work. And that's when I met my husband. I was sleeping on their couch, paying them rent. And I said, man, I want to have some people over. Can I invite some guys over? And they were like, sure, this is your house too. And so I called my friend Casey, and I was like, bring some cute guys over. And he brought over Neil, my husband. And that was the first time I had ever met Neil. And Neil is a ginger, red hair, freckles. Okay. And I remember I seen him, and he was so cute to me. I was like, oh my gosh, that guy's so cute. But he also had the most sweetest, kind personality. He was so respectful to me, and I had never had anybody really treat me nice like that. At least not a guy. A lot of guys treated me like I was a dope whore or something, And so Neil opened the car door for me. He took me to the gas station to buy me cigarettes and something to eat and all kinds of stuff. Just really so kind, treated me like a lady. And I just remember telling him we were hanging out that night and he invited me to go with him to his hotel room. And we got a hotel room with 2 beds. He laid on one bed and I laid on the other. We were facing each other like this, and we stayed up all night long talking about things like whether or not we wanted to have kids and if we believed in marriage and what our religious beliefs were, and just getting to know each other. And in the years and years that I had spent in active addiction, I had never had a guy take me somewhere and not try to fuck me. Had never had a guy take me somewhere and treat me with respect, not have ulterior motives. And so that was the first night I hung out with Neil, and I literally, when I tell you this, it's so funny. I left that hotel room the next. We went home, and he dropped me off at my house, the place I was sleeping at, on the couch, and I was like, I'm gonna marry that guy. Like I'm gonna marry that guy. And 2 days went by, and he called me and he said, do you want to go out again tonight? Like, I would love to take you out. And I said, what kind of girl do you think I am? I'm not just going to go to a hotel room with you. And he was like, no, we can do whatever you want to do. And I said, I'm babysitting my roommate's little girl. Can you take us to the park? It'll have to be like a family date. And he was like, absolutely. And he showed up with a pizza. And he took us to the park, and we went outside and played. And then we came back and we watched movies and ate pizza and just spent time together. And I had no idea that he had an addiction. No idea. And so like a couple days passed by, and he was staying the night at the house with us. I pushed the couches together, and we would stay up all night, just talking and telling each other stories from our past. And it was the next morning. I had to be at Kroger at work, but I also had to go to a court date. So I called him on my lunch break, and I was like, hey, can you do me a favor and pick me up on your lunch break and drop me off at the court? I got a court date for a traffic ticket. And he goes, I can do one better for you. I'll bring you my car, and you just bring it back to me after court. He trusted me with his truck. You know what I mean? Like, are you kidding me? And so he picked me up. I took him back to work and dropped him off. And he called me on my cell phone and said, look in the glove box. I left you a present. And I opened the glove box, and it was 2 methadone 10 pills. And that's when I knew that he was just like me. You know what I mean? And so I popped him. I went into my traffic court ticket, did what I had to do, and then brought him his truck back. And I was like, thank you so much. And he was like, yeah, I'm prescribed 365 methadone 10 pills a month. So, if you ever need any, just let me know. And that was all it took. That was like his introduction to saying like, hey, I have an addiction also, and don't feel ashamed around me. And so we just started using together. And that's how I met my husband. I don't know how I got you on that topic, but I got you there, didn't I?
No,
sorry.
That's a great me cute. And being able to bond like that is something that is special to you and you guys. So that's awesome. Yeah. I know the feeling. And when I met my wife, we talked all night. You know what I mean? We said, I love you the first night we met at the same time. So we have only been talking for like 4 days, like through Messenger. Like we met on Tinder. You know what I mean?
I have never had that experience before. It was like my soulmate was standing right beside me. You obviously have experienced it with your wife, so you know what I'm talking about. Yep. Like it was like we had so much in common, and we just connected immediately. And I had never experienced that with anybody ever before in my life,
Yeah, it's a special feeling. I know it really well, and I'm glad I can relate, because not everybody gets to, feel that way in the initial time that they meet.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. So what is different in your sobriety now that you can last 9 years?
So, okay. I truly believe that getting on suboxone it changed and saved my life. Like I had tried for over 10 years I know I didn't share a lot of this with you guys because my story, if I sat here and shared everything, it would take us 3 hours to get through it. Like I went in and out of treatment. I've been to over 8 rehabs. I've been to sober living like 17 times, 17 different ones. I've been to detox so many times. And I've been in and out of 12-step residential AA, NA programs for 10 years. And I never saw success until I got on medication. And I really do contribute a lot of my stability and recovery to being able to get on something that helped me with those cravings, because I couldn't make it past like 6 or 9 months. But do I believe that suboxone is the only reason why I'm sober today? No, absolutely not, because I have gone without suboxone many a times and I don't go back to using drugs. Like no matter what, I don't want to use drugs anymore. But what I did was, instead of just getting on medication and utilizing that to help me stay sober, I got into therapy. I worked a 12-step program for the first 4 years of my sobriety. I was like die hard. I was going to meetings, 3 times a week. I had a sponsor. I was worked the steps twice through with my sponsor. And then once I got through the steps twice, I did the steps the first time in the first year, like the first 6 months I was sober. And then like a year or so went by, and then I did them again with a new sponsor. Once I left the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I decided to utilize more like therapy and go and see a therapist and talk to them about my problems and vent to them more. And that really, really helped me. But at the beginning of my recovery, having like group meetings and other people to help me stay accountable really helped me stay sober as well. Because at the end of the day, like Matt was just for my opioid addiction, and I had a debilitating addiction to stimulants that trumped my opioid addiction. I feel like times a million. Like I was addicted to methamphetamine, and it was the hardest. It's still one of the things that I struggle with every day. Like if I have a craving, it's always for meth. It's always to give me more energy or to make me feel like I'm more productive. Being a mom in recovery, I always feel like I'm not doing enough. And I'll get those little creeping thoughts that come in that say, well, if you had stimulants, you could do more. And so I leaned into community support and talking to people about what I was going through and not keeping the way I was struggling a secret. And I started utilizing social media as a way to share what I was struggling with. So I didn't do this right away, and I don't recommend doing it right away because social media is brutal and people can be really, really mean. But after I had been sober for about 2.5 years, I started my YouTube channel, and I started to just go live on YouTube daily, sharing how I was doing, cooking for my family, talking about my recovery, and almost using it as like a personal diary. And as my following gained over there, I started like making meetings, and we created all inclusive recovery meetings for people to come to. And in 2020, I was doing meetings, Monday through Saturday, 6 days a week, for people. So that way during the pandemic, they could come hang out and we could all talk with each other. And so the reason why I've been able to stay sober for 9 years is because when I have a situation, I sit down and I realize that there's nothing that is going to make my situation worse than drugs would. So if I add substances to what I'm already going through, is that going to improve my situation? And I have learned through experience that it's not, over and over and over again. And so now when I have any kind of situation, like my job of 5 years just shut down a month ago, and I have to find a new job. And I immediately got so afraid and started freaking out. But I didn't think, oh my gosh, I could use drugs and this will make me feel better and I'll escape my feelings. Now, instead, I face my feelings, whatever it is. If me and my husband are having a disagreement, instead of running away from that, I face the feelings. I talk about it. I process it. I share it online. I share it with people that are close to me in my life. That's how I've been able to stay sober for 9 years. Is because when I go through something, instead of running from it like I did in the past, I stand and I face it, and I find a plan. Like I devise a plan to work through it. If I have to work through it, work around it, work over it, whatever it is, to overcome it. And there's plenty of times that I could have used substances and went back to my drugs of choice, or got off MAT and, returned back to my old lifestyle. But the life I have today, I have an amazing life today. Me and my husband just paid off our vehicles. We have our own place to live. Like we're renting, of course, right now, but eventually our goal is to buy our own home. We have a credit score that's almost 800 because we have rehabilitated our credit after years and years of addiction. We have full custody of our son back after losing custody of him for a whole year because of my drug addiction and because of our drug addiction. But it really fell on me because I was they more or less focused on me because I was the mom. CPS did, but my life is
2 different acronyms for fear.
Yeah.
Have we ever talked about the acronyms for fear?
Yeah, fuck everything and run, or face everything and rise, right?
And recover.
And recover. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's awesome because I think that, having the online presence is something that, gives yourself accountability. I was talking to somebody the other day that started an online, support group called Swift Steps, and it's all about Taylor Swift fans in recovery.
Oh, that's so cool. That's very neat. But I like it.
Yeah, they do meetings like every day. They do like song breakdowns and how it relates to recovery and all this stuff. And I was like, that's a really cool idea because she has such a huge fan base.
Yeah.
There must be a lot of sober people that are big fans of her. She's like, yeah, we just started 9 months ago. We got like 300 people in the group. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, I think any way that you can build support, outside of the rooms, because I'm an NA person. And I go to daily Monday to Friday, and I do GA on the weekends. So I'm all about 12 steps. I believe in them. I work them, but I'm all about, having a community support too, and making myself accountable, do another podcast, talking about my struggles on my podcast, and just being open about everything. I've had people reach out to me, family, friends, like, hey, we watch your show and I appreciate how honest you are. And, how are you doing? And they ask how I'm doing. When I stop my show for a while, they're like, is everything okay? I haven't seen you post about your recovery. Is that how are you doing?
Yeah.
So people checking in because I'm holding myself accountable. That's awesome that you have that online presence. Thank you again for having me on your show. And I'm glad we had the chance to sit down for you to be on mine.
Anytime. I love you, man. And I'm proud of you. And I just feel like on social media, everybody's out for themselves. Everybody is trying to make themselves popular. And I remember when I first was getting started, I'm not even I don't even have a big following, right? But I feel like my following is huge compared to what it used to be. I could have, the fact that there's over 100,000 people on my Facebook page, my mind. To me, that is amazing. And so I wish there was more people that were giving each other a hand up in the community on social media. So whenever I can, I try to bring people on who are just getting started, like when I was just getting started, because I just feel like it's just, I don't know. We need to be more helpful to each other. And so I'm always all about having people on the channel. I don't care how big of a following you have, how big or how small. I just want people to come share their stories. And I love people's stories that are different. And your has taken such a drastic change, marijuana to abstinence. And so I wanted to highlight that. So I really appreciate you for coming on my channel and letting me highlight that.
Yep, of course. I'll definitely have you back, Nicole. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today.
I love you guys. I hope I didn't talk your ear off.
No, you're all good. Have a great day.
All right. I'll see you later. Bye, guys. Love y'all.
Bye.